The reason why we have this area here called Acton really goes back to a decision made by the New South Wales surveyor Charles Scrivener, who was given the job of selecting a site for Canberra. Once the Canberra area had been decided upon by the Commonwealth or the federal government at that time, the Scrivener was sent out to look all along this area between Yass and the settlements of Canberra to pick the actual site for the city. And he picked this site where we're sitting now. One of the briefs that he was given in his documentation from the federal government was, and I'd like to read just quickly a section of that brief, was he had to select a place where a beautiful city occupying a commanding position with extensive views and embracing distinctive features. The brief goes on to say, the site will demand most careful consideration from a scenic standpoint with a view to securing picturesqueness and also with the object of beautification and expansion. So with these words ringing in Scrivener's ears, he came to this area here. Now, what he saw is he didn't see the lake that's behind me. What he saw was a river flowing through a very, very wide floodplain. And that river had formed, or the landscape here had formed, after a process that goes on for about 400 million years, in actual fact, what he was seeing. Another requirement that Scrivener had to keep in mind in his brief about selecting this area for the national capital was that it had to have a water supply, and he had looked at the Cotter River and thought that could give a water supply to this area because the Cotter River is higher, and so he thought if that was dammed we could get water for the city. So he had fulfilled that requirement. But it was this picturesqueness that I think would have been one of his main issues. And another requirement was that further on in the development of the city there should be an ornamental lake or a large lake that the city could be built around. So this was the vision that was given to Scrivener. He would have walked along here and he would have seen the Molonglo River coming out of what we call the Molonglo Gorge now in the uplands on the edge of this rift valley that we're sitting in. He would have seen the river come out and he would have seen it flood or come across the plains as very, very wide floodplains. What we see today is just a lake, but what we're really seeing is the river, the Molonglo River, in flood. And this is what would have happened quite often in the history of this river. In the early springs, when the snow would have been melting here thousands and thousands of years ago, even up to fairly recent times, historically, this river would have flooded across the floodplain, and this is what we're seeing now, is this what we call the Lake Burley Griffin. It really should be called Lake Scrivener in actual fact, but anyway, that's another point. He would have seen that and he would have thought, now this is where the picturesqueness is going to come in. This is where, with a small dam further downstream of where we're sitting, this floodplain could be permanently flooded, and we would then, just like that, have our lake. So he would have thought about that. And so in the end, Scrivener made the decision to site the city of Canberra in this area. And I think he did a marvellous job because, as I said before, you know, once you see this lake and Canberra now developing around it, it is now such a beautiful, beautiful site. And I think that's the picturesqueness that Scrivener achieved with the lake. And of course, there was a lot of opposition to this lake, and it was mainly coming from the politicians who even then didn't like coming to Canberra very, very much. I don't know why, but they didn't like coming to Canberra very, very much. So there's a lot of opposition about putting a lot of expense into this lake. The expenses, the finances could go to somewhere else to build the city. but the visionaries held firm, and one of these great visionaries, of course, was Prime Minister Menzies, who really fought hard and basically put his foot down with his parliamentary colleagues and said, we will have this lake. And so, in a lot of respects, the lake that's there behind me is a product of a decision made by Robert Menzies to force the issue of building this lake. And in the early 60s, finally, a dam was built, and that dam was named after Scrivener. As I said before, I think the lake should have been named after Scrivener, but the lake was named after Walter Burley Griffin, and I guess that's another story, isn't it?
Most people would know the history of that Bob Menzies was very keen on getting the lake and also getting Canberra developed. Apparently when the Queen was out here in 1954, she mentioned that Canberra seemed, she made some fairly derogatory remarks, if you like, about Canberra and the lack of fact that it didn't appear to be a capital city. And Bob Menzies, being the great person who worshipped the English monarchy, he decided to do something about it. And one of the things that he wanted to do was to get a lake in, which had been in the original plan. And he actually pushed for it to happen. And as you know, in the late 1950s, early 1960s, he actually pushed for it, and there's the story around the edge of the lake that while he was away, he found that Cabinet had rolled it, and then he came back and said it will be in there, and the lake started to come in. Now, it was a very big construction project for those days, and they used to have, I can remember being up on Regatta Point, which is just the other side there when it was being built, and this whole area was like a big ant's nest. There would be anything up to 100 earth scrapers, the great big earth scrapers, working continuously. And they worked day and night, and I would say it was probably for a good 12 to 18 months shaping the lake. To give you an idea of the size of it, over in front of the old Parliament House there was a hill about 300 feet high. When the Queen was visiting in 1954, we as kids had to all go and stand on the hill and hold up placards, and apparently from the steps of Parliament House it came out as our Queen. But that hill actually blocked the view from Parliament House to the War Memorial. It was high enough to block the view. Now, they completely demolished that hill with the earth scrapers and used that as part of the embankment around the lake. So it was a very exciting sort of project as well, seeing it all come to shape. And then eventually we were told that it was all finished and they were waiting for rain, and the bridges, of course, were a very big job. The bridges, both the Kings Avenue Bridge and Commonwealth Avenue Bridge, were very big jobs with the concrete pouring, and eventually it was all finished. And they said they were waiting for the lake to fill, and it was going to take anything up to 12 months with the normal. And then I recall, I think it was in the early part of the year, but we had some fairly heavy rain over a period of a week, and lo and behold, the lake was there.
It was closed off for quite a long time, and it didn't fill for quite a long time. I mean, the river just, they closed the dam off, but well, they had to let some water through, and the water that was going through was pretty well what was coming in, so it didn't start to fill at all for quite a long time. And the population, we were all saying, oh, that's a bit weird, they build the whole lake, and you've got all of this structure and all of the walls around it, and the new Commonwealth Avenue Bridge and the new Kings Avenue Bridge were all there, and but no lake. And then in the space of about 3 or 4 days it filled. It was exciting, and I used to ride my bike down, and many other people did, and stand on the edge and sort of see this lake magically appearing. It did come, really quite quickly.
I watched it on 8mm movie because we're in Germany from July 58 until late September 62, and the people who I was friendly with, who lived in McKinley Street, Narrabundah, sent me movies of the making of the lake. But we came home, and in 62 there was no water. And suddenly, in 64, within more or less overnight, it rained for 3 days in the mountains and it suddenly gushed down into a lake.